Welcome to Heroes of the Faith, where my guest today is Peter Darg, who is the European Director of Christian Broadcasting Network. But much more important for us here at Revelation TV, Peter is a trustee of our charity, the Revelation Foundation. And I want to honour Peter and just say thank you to him for supporting us and standing with us and helping us in the important work that goes on at the Foundation. Peter, great to have you on the programme. Thanks for being with us.
It is a miracle that we have such a program and a channel as Revelation, because if you go back just a few years, before satellite television in Europe, it seemed that there was a stranglehold on the gospel going forth in the whole continent of Europe. And today we have a remarkable window. I'm going to call it a window because windows can close as well as open. But the fact that we have a channel that shares the gospel with the people of Britain and Ireland and beyond in Europe and around the world through your internet connection is very special.
Well, thank you for the part that you play in making it happen as being one of our trustees. Now, viewers who watch Revelation TV, Peter, may be more familiar with your wife because of the programmes that she has on Revelation TV called Exploits Ministry. I understand that you've been married for 40-plus years. So I thought a good way to start off today would be to say to you, what's the secret of a successful marriage?
Well, you say that my wife is the face of Exploits TV, but it takes teamwork because I get to be behind the camera, which I much prefer, believe me, and putting my beautiful wife in front of the lens to do the ministry. But it's a partnership. It is a part of starting out as two separate individuals with very different ideas and ambitions and talents and careers, and gradually seeing the Lord meld those two together into one. It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of love, and I'm honored that I found the right lady to do that.
Amen, and we are too. I always get a little confused when I talk to you, Peter, because I'm never quite sure whether you see home as the UK, as America, or some other country around the world that you seem to be visiting from time to time. So you were born in the United Kingdom, is that right?
Yes, I am a proud subject of Her Majesty the Queen.
Okay. What part of the UK?
Actually, I was a proud subject of King George VI when I was born here.
You're telling us how old you are now. Okay.
Yes, definitely. But no, my parents emigrated to Canada when I was a young boy after growing up in Ruislip, Middlesex.
Okay. And where did you come to faith in Christ?
It was in America as a young boy. And you raise an interesting question that I think every one of us face. And that is, did I come to the Lord or did the Lord come to me? Mm-hmm. Maybe we kind of meet in the middle. I tend to think that because there's always going to be that curiosity, that longing in your heart. As you look up at the sky, as you see the stars, as you see the universe, as you see life, you think, where did all this come from? Who created this? Where am I fitting into all of this? And even as a young child, you can ask these sort of questions. And in that sense, when you begin to ask, when you begin to seek, God's there to help answer the question, and you just have to look in the right direction. For me, that was an encounter with several young Christians. You mentioned my wife is named Christine. What a wonderful Christian name. These two young girls that I met in grade school were named Grace and Joy.
Right.
That's a lovely combination.
Yes. Yes.
And I noticed that the elder of the two, Grace, used to do strange things in the classroom, and I would sit close to her, and I would notice before a test, she would just very quietly bow her head and start praying. I thought that was really bizarre. That was so strange to me. And one day I asked her, I said, what are you doing? Why do you do that? Well, I'm asking God to help me with the test. Well, I was fascinated by that. God would help you with a test in school? Mm-hmm. What kind of God is this? And she seemed to know, and I didn't. So it was through her that she invited me one day to a little Baptist church where her dad was the pastor. And this is the sort of church in Southern America where there's no air conditioning, the crickets are chirping, the windows are open, it's summertime, and everybody in the church is sitting there with a paper fan with an advertisement for a funeral home on it. Isn't that ironic that they always seem to have a funeral home on the fans in the church? Well, that night her dad preached a sermon and he said, if you want to receive Jesus, come forward. I came forward in this little church. Must have been 9 years old. Didn't quite understand what I was doing, but I felt compelled to do that act. And Christians talk about the fact that there's a process of sanctification in your life, that as a Christian you become gradually closer to God. You begin to read the Bible, understand, have comprehension about your faith, about God, about Jesus, about the world. And you also become much, much more aware of the evil in the world, of sin in the world, and you have that battle going on in your own life. So as a young boy, I had made a commitment, but I didn't really have that full sanctification. Still don't have full sanctification. You don't either. No. None of us has fully sanctified to the point where we are just totally a full 100% knowledge and full of grace.
And where does Christine fit into this story? You presumably met her much later on, did you?
Yes, we met at university. Right. But here's the other part of the story.
Sorry. Yeah.
And it has to do with the public library where I met Christine. Mm-hmm. One day at college, our philosophy professor walked into the room, put his satchel down. He said, I'm about to teach you, but I have something to say. Did you know that the public library in the city is looking for pages? I thought, that's a weird, why would a library need pages? Mm-hmm. He didn't mean pages in a book. He meant the lowest form of work in a public library is somebody who sits there and starts at the beginning of row 1 in the library books. And if you know the Dewey Decimal System, it's 0, 0, 0, 0. You start there, and as people pick books off the shelf in the public library, they look at the book, they say, oh, that's interesting. They put it back on the shelf in the wrong place. Right. And librarians hate that. So the page's job is to go through the stacks, one row by another, looking at all the books and pulling them and putting them in the right order. Well, thousands and thousands of books, okay? You go up to 999 on the Dewey Decimal System. Thousands of books. And one day, as I'm doing this laborious job of putting this, I was coming across all these books, and I thought to myself, all these books contain so much information, so much, I hope, wisdom. Where's the truth? Which of all these thousands of books has the answers for my life? And I began to realize there's only one. It's called the Bible. And then I met this Christian girl in the public library. And I took one look at her and I said, again, it's a leading of God in many situations. Just like, you totally don't expect these things to happen. But here was this young lady, and when she told me, by the way, my dad's a pastor. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? You're a Christian? Let's get together.
And the rest is history.
I guess the rest
married a little while
some
later.
History, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Peter, you're European Director of Christian Broadcasting Network. Sounds very grand, and I'm sure it is a grand job to do. Most people are familiar with CBN because of the 700 Club. But you look at something like CBN today and the 700 Club today all over the world, and you forget that it began in our lifetime, CBN, and it began because one man had a vision, Pat Robertson. Can you just tell us a little bit about, some of the ways that God has just worked to bring this mighty ministry into place?
Well, you must never despise small beginnings, and everybody has to start somewhere in whatever they're called to do by God. And in Pat Robertson's case, it was a very humbling experience because he came out of a very prominent family in the state of Virginia. His father was a United States Senator, and it was a distinguished family. He had a tremendous education. He served in the Marine Corps. He had a job, and a graduate of law school, was going into New York City to be a big, rich, successful, secular lawyer. And he had something that happens to a lot of people: divine discontent. I'm here, I'm in the big city of New York, I've got a wife, I've got children, I've got income. What's wrong, God? Why aren't I satisfied with all of this? This is the ambition of my life. And he felt that God was calling him to do something that nobody had ever thought of doing before, and that was to start a television station, a ministry that did the program that we today know as the 700 Club. It was a very difficult beginning. He started with about, I think, honestly, the story is in a book called Shout It from the Housetops. And it's the story of a man who had $70 American in his pocket, had several young children to feed, and went to the state of Virginia, bought a broken down, junky piece of television equipment that wouldn't even transmit around the block, much less around the world, and began living on soybeans, a 75-pound sack of soybeans. He couldn't afford any other food, and he knew that had nutrition in it. So his wife learned to make soybean pie, soybean casserole, soybean dessert. They, to this day, can never look at a soybean. But that was the humble beginning of the 700 Club. And the key to it was he was willing to go on television and just pray for people and say, we want you to accept Jesus. There was no beating around the bush with that.
Yeah, yeah. And just reel off some of the statistics today of the 700 Club and TBN so we get an idea of, from that beginning, which is how long ago now?
About 1961 or so.
Okay,
yes.
And here we are. So just tell us a little bit about today.
Well, at the time, the technology was pretty primitive compared to what we have today. And he began to use techniques such as, would you call in with a prayer request? Well, nobody had ever had interactive television before. Today, the 700 Club in America alone receives 3 million phone calls a year. People calling in. People are hungry for prayer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember sitting in a meeting with him in the early 1980s, and Pat came in the room in a very, at that time, fairly small ministry. And he said, I've got some exciting news. He says, I've just signed a contract for a satellite transponder. We all looked at one another. What's a satellite transponder? What's he talking about? He says that he and a man named Ted Turner had both signed to put their television channel on a satellite that would now beam down to the entire United States. Well, Ted Turner started something called Cable News Network, CNN. You may have heard of that. Mm-hmm. And Pat, at the same time, was saying, let's put the gospel on the satellite. I mean, this was pioneering.
Yes. Yeah. And you're part of that. And so you're European director today. What does a European director of CBN do?
He feels slightly overwhelmed because I'm actually jealous of the other regional directors of CBN, because the director in Hong Kong, he's got a big country, 1 billion people or so in China, but generally they speak Mandarin Chinese. Sometimes they speak maybe one other dialect. The director in Russia, he speaks Russian, very simple. In Africa, they speak French or English, and in Latin America, they speak Portuguese or Spanish. Europe, How many languages have we got in Europe? I did a document that had to be some kind of EU thing. It was 43 pages long in 26 languages. And that was just for applying for a trademark in the European Union. That's the problem with Europe. So many little countries with different cultures, traditions, languages, backgrounds, and you've got Catholicism, you've got the Orthodox Church here, you've got secularism is just rampant, especially in Western Europe.
But when you open the post in the 700 Club office, what kind of impact is the programme having? To just share with us, just encourage us a little bit as to the people who are being reached and the lives that are being changed.
Well, I love the fact that we're now able to break through in some of these other languages other than English. And we had, for example, a German 700 Club that's broadcast every day throughout German-speaking Europe. Well, that started about 5 years ago, and when I first met with some of the TV channels in Germany and said, we have a wonderful program for you, it's like the 700 Club, except it's in German, and the host is actually going to pray for your audience. What? Nobody would ever do such a thing in Germany. You know, this is totally alien to them, to thought that we could actually pray for people. But he did it, and again, we see an incredible response because people, as I've said, are hungry for prayer. Not just Christians. We have Muslims, we have atheists, we have Buddhists. People begin to have that revelation, I like to call it that, that God is real, and he sees this in the programs that we do, because we're just talking to ordinary people whose lives have been miraculously transformed. They've been healed, they've been saved from drug addiction, you name it. I mean, we've done the gamut of every available story of people's lives.
So what you're saying, Peter, is prayer works. People ask for prayer, you pray, and wonderful responses come.
That's it. We are seeing answers to prayer. That's the exciting part. My involvement with Reinhard Bonnke in Africa was such a joy, because we would see him preach a passionate message to unbelievable crowds, unexaggeratedly up to 1 million people in a single meeting. And we would see that word go forth over this crowd, and then Reinhard would never miss an opportunity to pray for those people to be saved and to be healed, and then come up and testify. And those people who came up on the stage, I'm telling you, I was as close as I am to you, and with a video camera, and would stand there in just awe that this could be real. I would zoom into people's eyes that looked like they were diseased and bloodshot, and yet Reinhard could hold up his hand and say, how many fingers am I holding? 5? Follow me around the stage. And these people would zigzag around the stage. I mean, what a thrill to see the Word of God confirmed with signs and wonders.
And what is even more thrilling is when you begin in your own personal life to see God at work leading you. You must have had a divine encounter at some point that caused you to meet Pat Robertson or
Jerusalem. Well, I sat up like a bolt when I heard him say that, and Christine did also. She heard Jerusalem, I heard London. I thought, wow, wouldn't that be fantastic to go back to England and see the 700 Club develop here in Europe. And so we had something of a slight disagreement here on what was going to happen.
They call it.
Yeah. And then one day we were in a church, and a man came up and he prophesied to me, had no idea who I was. We'd never been in this church before. And he said, if you don't put Jerusalem above all others, Peter, you've missed it. I said, okay, God, I'm not going to argue on that one. We're going to Jerusalem. So we went and we said to Pat, we're your candidates to start the Jerusalem News Bureau for the 700 Club.
Right. So there was no big recruitment campaign, an application form. It was just you and Christine sensed that nudge of the Lord, and you went.
I was actually studying in a theological seminary. I was about 3 weeks from graduating and thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to start a church or join a church somehow and become a pastor. And that's when we heard that from Pat Robertson. And we thought, we just had that, that's what you've been called to do.
And you went in obedience. That's the key thing, isn't it?
Yes, with 2 young children, we went to Jerusalem. And back in the 80s, we couldn't afford television. That's the ironic part of it. I had a 16-millimeter movie camera. I had to film my own stories. I would set up the tripod, run around the other side. This is Peter Darg reporting from Jerusalem, and then run back, turn off the camera, process the film, post it by courier back to America. That's how we did television in the early 80s.
Well, that was my next question, which was to say to you, what did you do when you get there? I mean, our viewers, so many of them love to go on a trip to Israel. Many of them say, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I lived in Israel? What was it really like?
Not easy living in a culture like that. Today, I would say it's a lot easier. But Israel was going through a lot of economic pressure. We used to go to the supermarket in Jerusalem, and there would be a man whose full-time job was to start, you remember I talked about the library going through the shelves, changing the books? There was a man whose full-time job in the Supersol was to go around changing the prices on all the products in the store. I mean, the inflation rate was going that quickly. Apart from that, just getting around the country was difficult. There was so much suspicion, especially of Christians. Why do Christians want to report about Israel? What do they care about us? I mean, this was the attitude of many people back in those days.
So, Peter, here you are, you're with CBN, you're European Director. How, as you look into the future, do you sense new ways of communication?
We're seeing an explosion, of course, on the Internet. The ability of people to post material on the Internet and to impact the world. And the real problem is content, because the world is looking for something that speaks to their heart. And we can have hundreds and thousands of silly little YouTube clips around, and we do. But I think ultimately, people don't care about so much about the technical side of things. They're looking for something that speaks to their heart, and that's going to be really important for us to produce television that is going to be honest and just forthright in telling people about their desperate need for Jesus.
Okay. Any unfulfilled dreams?
I have great dreams and hopes for our children, our sons. I think they are a real blessing to us. Our youngest son has a PhD from Oxford in quantum physics or something. I mean, I can't even pronounce the name, much less understand what he studied. But I think he has an amazing gift in his life. And our eldest son is working for Operation Blessing and going around to every disaster in the world. I generally find out where he is by turning on the TV and he's doing a report for the BBC or CNN, because they count on him as what they call a first responder. I mean, if there's a typhoon in the Philippines, our son David is generally there before even the news crews get there.
But of course, that isn't something that he's doing for a secular organisation. That, in fact, is part, is that right, of CBN?
Yes, that's the humanitarian arm of CBN, of the 700 Club. So he used to work with me and with my wife in exploits ministry, but as soon as they saw the amazing abilities and talents he had, and courage to be able to go into a place like that and deal with it and be successful. He's a real tribute to us.
Peter, we've got a couple of minutes left on the programme. Just give us an example of something that Operation Blessing is involved with, which will just encourage our hearts and say to viewers, it's a way of just knowing that the Lord is still working and has got compassion for the people of the world today.
Yes, there's so many, there's so many needs in the world. It's really heartbreaking to have to filter them out and say, really, what's a priority? What is in God's heart to help? It's not always just in Christian nations, interestingly. He's willing for us to go into Muslim nations, into Oriental nations that don't know the gospel. And the real blessing is to explain to these people, look, we're here not just because we care about you, but because we really have a heart to see you live a really fulfilling life. And the only way to do that, you do need to accept Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And some of the countries of the world where that's happening are...
Well, in Europe we've been very busy and in fact cooperating with Revelation TV in helping with food distribution to orphans in countries such as Romania and in Bulgaria, Albania. Eastern Europe is a desperate situation for many people.
Peter, it's been a joy to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being with us here at Revelation.